I'm gonna jump into it. And just real quickly, as you said, I'm the chief appraiser. The other half of
Can you hear
my
me, people
title.
on the call?
Oop, hold on.
Yeah,
mute all.
can hear you.
Oh, sorry.
Yep, mute everybody. Okay, everybody's muted now. Sorry. All this admin stuff that I don't normally get to do. But the other part of what I do is called collateral risk management. And that's where this kind of ANSI information comes from, is truly being able to say that we're accurately defining what our subject collateral is and what it is not, and how it compares to the market. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that you can look at something other than me, and you can see some examples that I've brought along. So can somebody just give me a thumbs up if you can see what ANSI means to you? Awesome, thank you so much. So just diving into it. So the whole reason for the meeting is that Fannie Mae came out and said that as of April Fool's Day, they were going to play a joke on all of us and start requiring appraisers to adhere to the ANSI standard. Now, the reality is that ANSI's been around since the late 90s. This is not new information. What's new is that they're setting a requirement that has not actually been the industry standard and is becoming the industry standard. So the whole focus of my talk with you today is how to address the question, particularly from your seller, but also anybody in the transaction that says, okay, so the assessor says my house is 2,000 square feet. When I bought the house, my appraisal said that it was 1987 square feet. They agreed. And now all of a sudden, this crazy appraiser is telling me my house is 1,600 square feet. How did I suddenly shrink? And what does this mean? And does it mean that I didn't get all the value out of my house? So the good news is that, hold on, we've got two more people in the waiting room that I need to let in too. So we have, it really should have minimal impact on you. And that is, sorry, I cannot multitask. I have to do this and not talk. Sorry about that. Cannot multitask and let people into the meeting and talk at the same time. So really what we're going to talk about is that this is not going to have an impact on your values. This is not going to have an impact on the quality of your appraisal. What's going to have an impact on is how much explaining of the appraisal you may have to do once it's actually received by the parties. So let's talk about the first change, because this is the easy one to understand. So the first change is that the stairs are now going to be included in your living area. So back in the day, this little stairs area would have been pulled back out of the second floor living area because it was not walkable area. ANSI has defined it that each one of those stair treads is walkable area, and therefore is going to be included in the living area. In most cases, it's going to make almost no difference to the appraisal. Oftentimes, because of measurements and rounding, we had these kinds of variations in appraisals anyway, and it made no material impact. It's just a change that you should be aware of. Again, particularly if you have an engineer for a client who looks carefully at their prior reports, then they are probably going to ask this question. You should be prepared. Yes, those stairs are now going to be included on the second level or third level, if it happens to be. So one of the bigger impacts is on split level properties. And the difference here is not that the rules have changed, it's how they're applied has changed. So everybody's seen these split level properties. We have them all over the Pacific Northwest. And really what has changed is previously, or let me start with the definition. So any portion that is at least partially below grade is supposed to be defined as basement. So this area of this property is technically basement area, even though it's only a portion of it and it's not a typical basement with small windows or egress windows or that type of thing. Up until April 1st, Fannie Mae allowed appraisers to adjust their reporting to conform to whatever was local custom. So local custom here in the Pacific Northwest is that we would report all of this as above grade living area, because that's how our market had looked at these properties. We're no longer able to do that. So this is how it's going to look on your appraisals now. So I happen to pull one out of Snohomish just because that happened to be an appraisal that I was looking at the moment. And this actually played right into exactly what we are working on. So this property is reported in MLS and in the assessor's office record as about 2,400 square feet of living area. Well, because of the ANSI regulations, and we can no longer change how we do this as appraisers, the appraiser will still show all 2,400 square feet, but it's broken out into what we can clearly define as above grade living area and what we can clearly define as below grade living area. The important part of all of this is that the adjustments do not necessarily have to change. So oftentimes you will see in a true basement, usually the finish area, the finish quality is maybe a little bit less. Maybe it only has, it's not a walkout. It's only you can only go up through the main living area. For whatever reason, it may not have the same value as the above grade living area. And so an appraiser will adjust for differences in living area in the basement differently than they would above grade. Well, Fannie Mae specifically says that these adjustments for above grade or below grade area are supposed to be based on the market reaction. So in these markets with split level properties, our market makes no differentiation on the living area, whether it's above grade or below grade. So if you're adjusting at $75 a square foot for differences in living area above grade, then they'll be adjusting for the same $75 below grade. This is the area where you can catch some errors in appraisals, particularly in those appraisals where it may not quite equate to your contract price, or let's just call a spade when the appraisal is less than your contract price. This is one of those areas that you can look to make sure that the appraiser addressed appropriately. Is the basement area adjusted at the same rate of your gross living area above grade? And if not, is it adequately explained as to why it is not? Because in a lot of cases, it should not be. We have lots of places in the Pacific Northwest where that basement area is full daylight. It has 10-foot ceilings. It's finished in equal quality to everything above grade. There's no reason to adjust it for anything less than you would on the above grade area. Again, before this, it may not have mattered. You may not have had to do that analysis because we could report it as above grade. Now, since the appraisers are forced to report it as below grade, it takes an extra step in the process to make sure that we are following the appropriate market data that shows whether that adjustment is appropriate or not. Now, when it comes into Penrith, our review team is educated on this, and we're looking for these errors, and hopefully we'll have these errors solved before it ever gets to your desk. So there is no confusion, so everything's thoroughly explained. Unfortunately, I do know that not every single deal you do goes through Penrith. So it's really important, especially if you're dealing with an investor or, a loan company that ends up using an appraisal management company, an AMC. Oftentimes their review process is just a checklist and they're not trained to look for these things. So those kinds of differences might fall on you, the agent, to be able to find those differences to help you argue against the appraisal if you disagree with the appraisal. So that's split level properties. And now we're going to talk about the changes. Nope, another person to admit, hold on one second, sorry. Now we're going to talk about the changes of what happens with above grade area that does not meet the ceiling height requirements. Now, I'm going to go through what ANSI requires. You're not required to figure out how to calculate this. So don't take it on as a math problem. Just follow along, because as we explain it, you're going to be able to recognize what you need to look for in the appraisal, not necessarily to verify if their math is correct. Okay, so when the property has a sloped ceiling, okay, usually you just need to picture a finished attic, right? And it has those steep pitched roofs. What ANSI has decided is that to be included in finished living area calculations and reported as living area on the GLA line in the appraisal, that living area must have an average ceiling height of 7 feet for more than half the total finished area, and must have that's supposed to be a maximum ceiling height of at least 8 feet at the highest point. So if the entire area is 7 feet, but doesn't reach an 8-foot peak, it still may not be included in living area. All of that living area is measured from the 5-foot height mark of the ceiling into the highest point of the ceiling. So on this sketch, it shows that we have this area to the side that's marked as attic storage. This represents the area of this finished attic that is less than 5 feet. Now we're going to go through a real life example, and this will start to make some sense. Okay. We've seen this property all over our markets, right? Cute little cottage has a finished attic, right? So in this particular example, this was marketed as 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, 2,784 square feet. Because of the finished attic space, which I'm going to show on the next slide, our appraisal reported it as 1,480 square feet above grade and 200 square feet below grade. We just lost over 1,000 square feet, or did we? So this is how you should look for it in your appraisal when you see these kinds of differences. So what happened with this particular one is the appraiser properly measured from the 5-foot ceiling height to the outside wall and removed that area from the calculation. The appraiser then measured from the 5-foot ceiling height to the highest point. Unfortunately, the highest point of this ceiling was 7 feet. We didn't meet the 8-foot requirement for ANSI. So none of this area qualifies as living area. Now, does it have value? Does it still have utility? Well, you bet it has utility. Look, it has 2 bedrooms, right? The market still places value on this. So what does the appraiser do if they can't call it living area? What they do is they report it the way that ANSI requires us to do. And then they add a completely separate line item that's called non-GLA market accepted finished area. What does that mean? Finished area that has market value that because of this new regulation, your appraiser, can't call living area. So if you looked at that previous slide, you saw that the total square footage that had to be excluded was 480 square feet. It's 480 square feet from the 5-foot ceiling line across to the rest of the 5-foot ceiling line. But that floor continues going because there is additional sloped ceiling. So what the appraiser did was add in the entire 576 square feet of attic area on a separate line item, right? Where this really comes into play is in the comparables, right? So this comparable, I actually verified, it does have finished attic area, and we'll address how the appraiser is supposed to deal with this later. But the important part of this is when you compare the subject to this comparable and they make an adjustment, this adjustment happens to be at $75 a square foot for difference. They then go back to the 576 square foot attic, that they could not include, and add it back in at $75 a square foot. So the net adjustment to this comparable is $20,000 because it is overall larger than our subject property. But you can see that this $63,000 adjustment seems really large, but when you put it back in, there's actually a very small difference between the two. So again, you have your 480 square feet of area that would be 5-foot ceilings into the highest point, and 5-foot ceilings into the highest point. So if we had this imaginary building where this highest peak point was actually 8 feet, this is how the appraisal would look. They would actually now add in the additional 480 square foot as living area, because now that area qualifies as ANSI defined living area. And they would make their adjustment up here, which of course this adjustment amount would change. What would also change is there is still non-GLA market accepted square footage of 96 square feet, which represents the area from the 5-foot ceiling height out to the end of the actual wall. So it really doesn't matter. These adjustments would change. Your net adjusted difference is still going to be $20,000. So it really has no difference on your overall market value, whether this 480 square feet is considered in the living area, where it's considered as non-GLA finished area. It should have no impact on your appraisal at all. Here's the other part. Did you catch it? So this is still reported as 3 bedrooms and 2 baths. Well, where are 2 of those bedrooms? In the attic that we can't include in living area. Seems counterintuitive, right? If it's not living area, how is it rooms? Fannie Mae was asked, and so in their FAQ, they came out and said, while ANSI does not define where to put the rooms if they don't qualify as living area, Fannie Mae has decided that it is most reasonable to include the entire room count on your room count line above grade, even though the living area doesn't count as living area. I'm not going to get on a soapbox as to whether I agree or disagree. It's just, this is what is going to be compliant for Fannie Mae. And this is also an area where I most frequently see the errors being made by appraisers, because this would have been reported as a 1-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,480 square feet. and the appraiser would adjust for the additional 2 bedrooms on a separate line item. That's actually incorrect based on the way that Fannie Mae wants the report filled out. So again, hopefully your lender is looking for these things for you, but because there's so much misinformation out there and so many errors being made, it's important for you to know what to look for so that you can question it if it's not accurate. Some appraisers are very confused about this whole thing, which is why we're giving these presentations. So I'm going to do a quick pause. I've let everybody in. I see 2 things in the chat. I'm just going to check real quick to see if these are questions. Okay, so actually these are about basements. So the questions, guess what? We're going to talk about next. Our basements. So if I don't address those questions in this part of the presentation, then I will go ahead and make sure that we go back and address those questions.
Quick question real quick, Limri.
Yes.
I had a chat and someone said that their house is, the whole house is under 8 feet, the ceiling height. What happens then?
Actually, so if it's flat ceilings, it's going to fall into this next discussion with ceiling heights on basements, because I called it basement because that's usually where you run into it. Okay. But when it's flat ceilings, this is the whole part of that discussion.
All right, I'll just let you go.
And then at the very end, I'm also going to talk about how appraisers can opt out of it, because there really are houses that don't fit into this at all. And then so I'll just keep blabbing away, and if I don't cover these things, then we'll definitely handle questions at the end, because there's always questions.
Thank you so much.
Of course. So ceiling height in basements. So again, like we just discussed, so level ceilings. Now this doesn't necessarily have to be the basement level, but that is where you are most often going to see this come into play. So for a level ceiling, it must be at least 7 feet high. And wherever there is a beam or duct work or anything else, it must be at least 6 feet 4 inches under that beam or whatever you're going to bang your head on as you're walking through, if you're tall enough. So how is this addressed? So again, real life example. So the subject's ceiling height is actually just under 7 feet. So it's 6 feet 9 inches. So it doesn't really qualify as living area. And then of course, this ductwork is also less than the 6 foot 4 inches that are required. So what does the appraiser do with this? So the appraiser puts in your basement area that there's only 1 square foot of finished area, and all of the rest of the basement area with less than 7 foot ceilings is reported as a separate line item. Just like we saw in the other example, there's an adjustment on the basement line and an adjustment for the additional 671 square feet. That's the way that the appraisal was provided to us. However, after clarification with Fannie Mae, it's actually not correct. And here's why. On page 1 of the appraisal, they are asked, how much basement area do you have? How much of that basement area is finished? What percentage is finished? It doesn't ask what percentage is living area. It says what percentage of the basement is finished. Problem is, this is not the way that the appraisers are being trained. The appraisers are being trained that if it doesn't meet ANSI, it can't be on that grid line. Also, a holdback is that the appraiser data entry software is not advanced enough for them to be able to say it's 100% finished and not have it show up on this line. So they're dummying in information to try to force the appraisal software to give them what they want. So because I'm seeing a lot of appraisals, they're coming in, they look completely misleading, which is a USPAP violation for appraisers because we should not be attempting to mislead. I asked Fannie Mae. I said, all right, Fannie Mae, let me tell you what I'm seeing. And this is what they're doing. And in this, I used this exact example and said the basement is 100% finished, but does not qualify by ANSI as living area because of the limitations of the appraisal software. The appraisers are just making it up as they go along. And Fannie Mae's response, below grade area and below grade finished area is reported on the basement line. End of story. Doesn't matter if it meets ANSI or not, it's supposed to be on the basement line. However, appraisers don't know this. Fannie Mae hasn't come out with guidance on this. Your lender probably doesn't even know it. So in general, as long as it is adequately addressed somewhere on the appraisal, we're letting all of these go through. The reason being is Fannie Mae needs to see enough of these to understand where the confusion is. They will come out with a guideline, a clarification, and then we will have one standard to actually move forward with. But until we actually have one standard that is dictated by Fannie Mae, as long as it is adequately addressed somewhere in the appraisal, we're letting these go through. All lenders are letting these go through. When I say we, it's the collective we. All of us are just going to continue to let these go through until Fannie Mae decides. We hope that this whole thing is kind of dumb and they shouldn't have done it. But if they continue forward with it, that they will come out and give some more specific guidance so that everybody is reporting it the same way. So in reality, the way this should read is 672 square feet basement area and 672 square feet finished area on this line. All rooms should be reported on this line, and everything in the basement, regardless of ceiling height compliance, is reported here. What the appraiser should also do, though, is within the report, describe whether there's any market resistance to the lower ceiling in the basement. This is where you could see a difference in the square footage adjustment between above grade with 10-foot ceilings and below grade with 7-foot ceilings. You could see a difference in market reaction, and they could be valued differently on these two lines. But that should be thoroughly explained in your appraisal. And if it is not, then your lender should be asking for a revision and getting that information. So here's the other part that fits into this. So if you remember that very first example with the attic, that comparable that what it was being compared to actually has a finished attic, but there is no way for the appraiser to know how much of that area met ANSI standards. That information isn't out there. MLS is not required to be ANSI compliant. The assessors aren't required to be ANSI compliant. So unless the appraiser appraised that property themselves, there's no way for them to know. So what it ends up doing is creating that circumstance that I showed you on the grid, where we have this across the board adjustment that all the comparables that have finished attics are adjusted on that living area line, and they're all adjusted back in on a second line. There's no way to avoid it, but that is the appropriate way for the appraiser to address that situation. Our last piece is, what if it just can't meet ANSI standards? So some of the things that are specifically excluded from requirements is if it's multifamily. If it's a 2 to 4 unit, you don't have to worry about ANSI standards. You don't have to worry about ceiling heights. You don't have to worry about slope ceiling, nothing. 2 to 4 unit properties does not apply. For your apartment style condominiums, the ones that are stacked, the appraiser is measuring from the interior walls only, and so ANSI does not apply. But what if there is a circumstance where none of the living area is above grade? So if you look at this property, based on the ANSI definition, any portion that is below grade is basement. That means this property is 100% basement and 0 living area. Well, that's not going to work, right? We cannot possibly do that. So there is an out that's allowed through Fannie Mae, and you enter in GXX001, which Fannie Mae has trained their collateral underwriter computer to look at and realize that this is going to be an exception, and it's not going to be brought into to ANSI standards. And another example of it, and I didn't put a picture in because everybody knows what I'm talking about, are like some of our cliffside or view homes where you drive into the garage area, but all of your real living area is below grade or possibly 2 levels below grade. Those would also be an exception. And then outbuildings. Outbuildings do not need to apply to that. They still need to measure the size of the barn or the size of the shop or whatever that is, but there is no ANSI measurement standard because that's not living area, it's an outbuilding. And then, I don't know, whichever poor appraiser gets this guy, not even sure how they're going to make the calculations. I would assume that they're just going to do an exception. I would. I actually did talk to an appraiser just 2 days ago. They were doing a log home, and all the sizes of the logs were different widths. So how do you be ANSI compliant when you're supposed to measure to the outside walls if all the logs are different sizes? I advised him that you're just going to have to say that it doesn't meet to ANSI standards and use the exception. So there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of misinformation out there. I encourage everyone, educate yourself as much as possible. I love that so many of you are attending this because this information is dynamic and we all need to learn. Fannie Mae actually has some really great information out there that I don't want to say dumb down, but they try to make as palatable as possible to those who are not in the industry. So very little lingo. They try to make everything as easy explained as possible. And they have this YouTube series that they call the Noble Appraisal video series. And it actually goes over a lot of different things, but they do cover this measurement standard. And these are the links on here. And so when I send over my presentation to Adam later, you'll have these links and you can just pop onto the Fannie Mae website and take a look for yourself. And with all that, I'm ready for questions. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of them. And I'm going to leave this up because I find oftentimes I have to refer back to one of the diagrams. So are there any questions? Did I put everybody to sleep, or are you just shocked and amazed?
I thought it was great. There's a lot of good info in there, and I like that you explained how, it's not bundled together anymore. Now we've got certain line items and you got to break things out and, separate a lot more things than we're used to. Yeah, if you have any questions, unmute yourself and ask up. Nobody. Or you can send me an email and I can forward it over to Lynn
Somebody
Marie.
put something in the chat here. Hold on here. Well, yeah, we'll definitely get you. So the people who had asked, the information regarding the true basement and overall about ceiling height. Did I cover enough of that information, or do you still have questions? I'm going to assume that's a yes.
You get 30 real estate agents in a Zoom meeting and no questions. That's pretty amazing. Good job, Lynn Marie. And you know what is cool about Penrith now that we have Lynn Marie? Lynn Marie goes through every single appraisal that comes in the door, looks for inconsistencies, you know, obviously with anything low, but every single one that comes through the door. She's a wealth of knowledge and we're so lucky to have her. Thank you so much again. Appreciate it.
Of course, absolutely.
This
Hey,
is
there's
Maren.
one.
Well, I did have a question.
Okay.
I think I know the answer because I think it falls into one of the last examples that you gave. But in where you have a daylight basement where, you know, you've got standard size doors that open up, French doors and all those types of things, I would gather that that still is considered a basement. And then the floor above it would be the living space. Is that correct or not?
Yes, that is correct. So any portion of a level that is below grade is to be reported on that basement line. Again, the real determination between whether it is adjusted the same as above grade living area or as basement area is really determined on the quality of the basement, whether there's exterior access, you know, those full-size windows, all of that is going to impact whether that's adjusted the same as it is on the above grade level. And that's really the area to watch for is how it's being adjusted. There are some old-timey appraisers that just have a flat rule in their mind that if it's basement area, it's worth 50% of what it is above grade. And that is not necessarily the true reflection of how the market reacts. So, so that's information just for you to know. But yes, that is basement area and will always be reported as a basement.
Great. Thank you so much. You did a wonderful job.
Thank you. Oh, I do see a new chat question here. How is this change playing out in your experience? Is it causing delays? Are deals falling through more than before? Okay, so I can only speak to what's happening at Penrith. Is it causing delays? No. And that is the number one reason for that is our appraisal desk is trained to look for these things. And if there are potential issues, if they see ANSI is stated in the appraisal, they send me an email right away that I need to look at this because if there are revisions, we want to jump on them right away. So no, in our experience, we as a company are not seeing this impact us either in value or in turn times. I am hearing overall, before some of you were in the meeting, I attended the Appraisal Coalition meeting this morning, and they are seeing lots of concern, confusion, and difficulty on the appraisal statewide, because it was the Washington Coalition. I'm sure it's nationwide as well. So yes, I think overall as an industry, there's an impact for us as a company. Just because of the way we have our department set up, no, it's not impacting us. I don't want to say all because of me. That sounds wrong. All right, it looks like we have time for more questions. It doesn't have to be ANSI. If anybody has something that you've ever wanted to ask an appraiser and didn't have the opportunity to ask, I'm open for hot seat questions.
Oh boy.
Hey, Lynn Marie.
Yes.
Hi, Mary Lee here from Windermere, Queen Anne. So when you're looking at comps, are you always looking at like kind homes? So if I have like a 1-story with basement, are there comps that you're pulling typically like 1-story with basements within a certain parameters, mile parameters? How does it, what's the approach to that?
Okay, that's actually a really good question. So back in the day, Fannie Mae had some very specific guidelines, within the last 6 months, within 1 mile, you can't have adjustments more than, 10% per line, 25% net, or 15% net and 25% gross adjustments. All of that has gone out the window. So those parameters don't apply anymore. However, comparable selection, your best comparable is the exact same house next door, right on the adjacent parcel. That's your best comparable. So when I talked to the Appraisal Institute fall conference this coming October, one of the things I'm talking about to the appraisers is how to address comparable selection in the shortage market. And in general, if you have one sale from directly within your market, so that you have something that shows what exactly your market is doing, one sale that's similar in design style to show that the market accepts, whether that's your single story or a basement, whether it's a 2-story, whether it's a split level, whatever that is, something that shows market acceptance of that design style. And then if either of those or both have to be very dated sales, then you also need some kind of a recent sale on which to determine if there needs to be a time adjustment to reflect changes in the market. Now, in these days, we have so few properties, you can't get away with just 3 comparables in most situations. So you need to then further expand. So I need an additional appraisal because my subject actually has 3 full bathrooms and everything else has 2.5. So from there, you then start expanding in time, going back in time and out in distance. But you do start from a very small geographical area and work out much like your buyer would when they're looking for a property. I really want to be here close to this school. Well, there's nothing available. So, okay, so I'll go this far out and maybe instead of a 4-bedroom, I'll also do a 3-bedroom. And they'll start working their way out from what their real ideal is. And that's the way that appraisers also do comparable selection.
That's okay. Thank you for that. And then what about when you talk about time adjustment?
Mhm.
So let's say it's like the perfect comp, but that sold 8 months ago.
Correct.
And would that be like a time adjustment? And then how do you factor in appreciation, right? I mean,
well, that exactly is what a time adjustment is.
Right.
And actually, I have a whole presentation on this. I don't know if Adam, I usually do this on a sales meeting kind of thing, because it usually takes 10-15 minutes, but I talk about the matrix of how time adjustments are done. But in general, there is enough market data to extract how the market is appreciating. It's harder in that pre-spring market where it's just revving up, right? You have your February, early March sales, and they're starting to explode, but the market data hasn't caught up. But by now, the appraisers should have a very clear metric. And then on that line, on the appraisal grid, where they report the date of closing and the date of contract, that's where they put in the adjustment to show that the market has increased since that transaction. And it's actually based on the contract date, not the closing date, because that was the moment in time that the parties agreed that that was market value. And then, if the lender took too long to close or whatever, that doesn't make a difference. It's that moment in time. So it's from contract date to the appraisal effective date is how those time adjustments would be calculated.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
Mary, I'll get Lynn Marie to get on a sales meeting too with us and go into detail with that, because I think that's going to be a good thing for everybody to know too.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, one more question about that, follow-up question. You said that you have one sale in the area and you have one similar in design.
Can't hear you, Kim.
Oh, you can't? Oh, sorry, guys. Hey, thanks for letting me know. Is this better?
That's better. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
It was too far away from me. So you had said that you have one sale in the area and one sale similar in design. So are you saying that if you have a 2-story home with a basement, the one in similar design would be another 2-story with basement?
Correct.
How are you defining one sale in the area?
Well, it's pretty, it depends. It really depends on the area. I mean, if it's downtown Seattle, it could be your market area could be defined within a couple of blocks. If it's a rural area, it could be defined within 20 miles. So it depends. And again, what I like to relate it to is we're looking at, the appraisers are supposed to look at the market data the same way your buyer would. So if your buyer is looking at a particular area for a particular reason, whether it's proximity to a work base, proximity to a school, being near public transportation, there's lots of communities that people want to buy into because they're so close to the light rail. Whatever that defining item is, then we want to show something as proximate as possible to show that there is an active and vibrant market in that particular area. And the reason for that, quite honestly, is we learned a lot in the last housing bubble. And one of the items that was learned was that when the appraisers went too far away, that those may not adequately address what's going on in the subject's own market. And then just additional background on me. So I say a lot of we's. Before I came to Penrith, I was at Home Street. Before I went to Home Street, I worked directly for Fannie Mae, writing their repurchase letters on appraisal matters. And that was one of the findings that we had at the Fannie Mae desk, was that when the appraisers went too far away, they weren't necessarily reflecting that the market reaction to that location. And so that's why having something as close as possible is preferred. But if there really is absolutely nothing at all similar available, then of course you just have to go farther away.
So that's why sometimes you'll see a two-story, the subject property is a two-story and basement. You'll see one two-story and basement, and another comp on an appraisal might be a one-story and basement.
Correct.
But with similar, very close to the subject property as far as location.
Exactly.
The next block or that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. I mean, you try to stay as similar as possible, right? If somebody is looking for a no-step one-story, really hard to say that person would be interested in buying a two-story. But when, there's, one house available for every 20 people, you'll take what has 4 walls and a roof sometimes.
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Lynn Marie, I do have another question.
Sure.
Regarding how are you comparing houses, one with a view and one without a view? If you have two like-kind properties, and the one without the view is a subject, or let's say the one with the view. Well, okay, how do you give view properties, I'm sure, more value, but is there like a bracket, like a number, like another 100K, another 50K for a view property of the same, same type of style and the same type of house?
There is no magic percentage. It needs to be extracted from the market because it depends on the price point of the property, the location of the property. It depends on what kind of view. It depends on if there's other mitigating factors with the view. We have lots of view properties that have a view because they're right above the freeway. There's lots that go into that analysis. In shorthand, the appraisers will use one of two methods. If they have enough comparable sales, they'll do paired sales analysis, right? They'll look at the one that has the view and the one that doesn't have the view, and what was the difference? What did the market react to it? Most of the times there's not enough available information there. So they'll actually do an extraction where they will look at everything that goes into that property, and they'll extract out the value of the subject property itself, the improvements to the site, and they'll break it down to a site value. And then usually the differences in site value will reflect all of the factors, location, site size, view, other types of items that might be involved in that. So there's a lot of different ways to go into it. And actually site valuation is a whole 3-day class that appraisers have to take when they're going through their appraiser education.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
All right, we've got 5 minutes left. So I don't know if Adam, you want to do some wrap up comments, or if we're going to try to get one more question in.
Anybody else? You got one more chance. Okay. Lynn Marie, thank you so much. Thank you everybody for joining me and Lynn Marie on this presentation. I hope you learned a lot about the ANSI requirements, and Lynn Marie, you have such a great way of presenting too. Makes it easy
Thank
to
you.
understand. And if you have any questions on our deals or not, bring them to me and I'll run them by Lynn Marie and we can talk about them, one-offs and things like that. I hope you guys all have a great rest of your Thursday. It's sunny outside, so get out there.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks again, Lynn Marie.
All right, great. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Lynn
Bye.
Marie. Bye.
Thanks.